Welcome to Clear Conversations, Entrepreneurial Legacies with your host, John Sleeting, an executive partner for Clearwater Capital Partners. Join John and his guests on this exclusive journey behind the scenes of extraordinary entrepreneurial families. In this series, we will dive deep into the stories of John's guests, who generously unveil the paths they've walked, the challenges they've overcome, and the wisdom they've gained along the way. Throughout these conversations, we explore their achievements beyond mere recognition, disclosing the distinctive perspectives that have shaped their entrepreneurial journeys. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, and welcome to Clear Conversations, the Entrepreneurial Legacies series. I'm your host, John Sleeting. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Naseeruddin, as well as James Chapman. Samir has multiple businesses. He's a practicing MD as an internist, and he will share more about his experiences in developing businesses in his life's journey, starting as a young boy in India, immigrating to the United States, and working extremely hard to develop his practices as well as his enjoyment of what we'll call passion assets, and we'll explain more about that as we go through this conversation. I'm also joined by James Chapman, who is a senior wealth advisor with Clearwater Capital Partners. James has developed an expertise in passion assets, the planning associated with them, how these assets fit into one's estate planning strategy, financial plan, and the enjoyment. James spearheaded our Clearwater Capital Foundation Supercar show for charity, where we raise funds for outstanding organizations that is our ability to give back into the community. And James will share a little bit more of both planning strategies as well as the enjoyment and giving back and the use of passion assets. So a lot to take in, and we look forward to the conversation. Samir, James, thank you so much for joining me today for this discussion on passion assets. And we'll explain more of what that even means a little bit later. But I'm grateful for you in this conversation. And Samir, I'm going to start with you and ask you about this concept of entrepreneurial legacies. And if you think about this word legacy, what does that mean to you, and how have you processed that?
Well, thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. That's a good question. Legacy for me is more about, I think, creating that brand, that name, and allowing it to live on, right? I think that's what legacies are, is how you're remembered. For me, what's very important is knowing that I've done the right thing with my businesses, with my entrepreneurial mindset, and creating that legacy so it not just stays with me, but also transcends and goes on to the next generations. Mm-hmm. Whether that's family or whether that's somebody else that comes in and takes over the business, or from a purchase standpoint, transactional. At least that you're a part of that legacy, and that legacy lives on. Yeah.
I
think it's important, right?
Takes on a life of its own, so to speak, that transcends even who you are, and yet you're the catalyst to make that happen.
Yes.
James, when you think about individuals we work with, how have you been thinking about and developing your framework on this concept of legacy?
Yeah. I think what's really neat is to be in the position to be the individual to help frame a person's legacy. So many times the individuals that come through our door into Clearwater Capital, let's say they're kind of that standard 50-year-old business owner. They've got a family, they've got kids, they've got a million things going on. They have that entrepreneurial mindset, but they are so focused on what that immediate next thing is. And so to be the individual who can kind of sit them down, humbly from a position, of course, and have them pause and say, what has that thought process looked like for you? And so typically you'd be surprised, at least I'm surprised to realize that sometimes not a whole lot of thought has gone into what really is occurring down the road. What is all this for? They're growing. Grow the profits this next quarter, this next hire, this next initiative. But what is it all for? So to be the individual to kind of sit them down and help them frame that mindset for not only them, but their entire family, is just such a neat position to be in. Yeah. And what makes my day, every single day, more interesting than the last one sometimes.
Yeah. Well, you think about this, entrepreneurial legacies. There's the entrepreneur aspect, and then there's the legacy side. Yeah. And yet the day-to-day, right, the importance, the tyranny of the urgent comes in on the entrepreneurial aspect. And there's not time for the legacy thought process, creation, the how do I make sure
Yeah.
that this lives beyond me? And so, Samir, when we talk about entrepreneurism, you're a doctor, right? Practicing.
Yes. Yeah.
You've got med spa, you've got a lab ownership, you've got buildings that you own, you've got an internal medicine practice that you have a lot of activities going on.
Yeah.
Can you summarize that a little bit for listeners of the breadth of all your entrepreneurial endeavors?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it started off with my parents and just having that entrepreneurial sort of that backbone. I mean, my dad started off as a builder, and initially he was just a computer programmer, but then he went on to become a builder. Essentially, one thing went to the others. And then next thing you know, he's an entrepreneur building, having a construction company, surrounded by a bunch of friends as well that were, entrepreneurs. And essentially what happened is, when I came out of residency, I finished internal medicine at Stroger at Cook County. I just wasn't getting the job offers that I really liked. And I came out and I said, I told my dad, and I'm like, hey, look, I'm confident I could do this a lot better. And he said, well, I tell you what, let me start you off. We'll get you a nice clinic. I'll build one for you. You got to pay me back. It's no interest loan, and you got to pay me back every dollar. So I said, I can do it. And, that's when it first started. That I would say that my first clinic. Little by little, I built it. I hustled, I networked, I got my name out there. I took call at the hospitals. That clinic grew, right? I mean, it's actually named after my dad's construction company, which is called Skypoint. Okay. So I called it Skypoint Medical. Yeah. The name of his construction company is Skypoint Builders.
Okay.
But little by little over time, you realize how fast things snowball, and then it became a multi-specialty group practice. I started diversifying in various other, I understood ancillary a little bit more, and that kind of allowed for me to pivot, or so to speak, and elaborate more, I would say that allowed for me to grow into the lab space, understanding ancillary. Okay. I mean, at one point, I also did a little bit of I would say physical therapy was something else that I had at that point that was an adjunct to Skypoint. So you try different things as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
What's funny is when I was during this time frame of starting off my practice, I got a job to be a medical director of an acne clinic, and this is back in 06 or 07, before Botox was really big, and they actually said, hey, look, we think this is going to do really well here. We want you to incorporate this, and we're going to, get you trained and certified and everything for aesthetics.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, sure. Where do I sign? Because I was in so much debt. I need a job, So pretty much, they would have told me to do anything. I would have done it. But in any case, it was great, right? Because at that time, then I learned about the whole aesthetic field before it really got big. Yeah. But I kind of piggybacked it into my medical practice as well, but eventually I started gaining this following.
Yeah.
And then I would say the practice grew, but it's funny because you have patients coming in there, seeing the providers that are there. We had primary care. Myself, I'm a vein specialist, so I would be treating patients for venous medicine, or sort of varicose veins and problems that they have with their circulation. And then you got someone there that wants to get Botox and want to get their lips done or something,
I'm just picturing
the lobby's like a smorgasbord.
we have listeners, dialing in right now, right, or listening in, and they're like, I thought this was on passion assets, right?
Yeah.
I thought this was on cars and whiskey and watches and yet that's the downstream, right? That's the outback. That's the benefit that comes into play from everything that you go back and creating and starting out with. You're in so much debt.
That is, and then eventually that segued off into creating Skybalance, because we carved out, an aesthetic practice that focally concentrated on aesthetics and wellness. And that was 2013, and now we're about 11 years old,
Yeah.
So, but things sort of it's kind of interesting how life takes you down these sort of channels and roads, and, finishing residency in internal medicine and, having a subspecialty in vascular and venous medicine, and all of a sudden I have an aesthetics practice.
Right.
So it's just like this. I call it more of a journey, but it's very interesting. But I think that's definitely the foundation to get you to where you're going to be in the future, as far as what you want to do. But that also allows for you to obtain and have passion assets, right?
Yeah.
I think that comes with hard work. That comes with the grind. That comes with time.
Yeah.
And granted, when I was coming out of residency, there's no way if someone said, hey, do I'll sell you this Rolex for $10,000, $15,000, my jaw would have dropped. And I would say, why would I do that? That's crazy, you know. But at that time, it just wasn't feasible. But once you kind of get down a road, you start building foundations, like creating wealth, and you start enjoying life and different aspects of it. I think it really allows you to get certain things that you really enjoy. Like I do enjoy like cars. I do enjoy, you know, collecting different things.
Well, before we get into the cars and the collections, think about that, you know, that work. Why does that motivate you to do what you do to allow Samir to do what he does?
Well, because that's the part that most people don't see. Not to use a bad pun, but like getting under the hood of a case and a family and an entrepreneur. You know, so many times they'll just see the guy driving down the road in the Ferrari, the Lambo, or whatever thing, and you know they might have their preconceived notions about what that person is. But my favorite part is meeting with that person, really getting to understand what that journey looked like to get to where the end result that most people are just now seeing. Right. They see the end result, they don't see the journey.
Right.
And that's why no two cases are the same. I particularly do like to work with people who are into exotic cars, watches, whiskeys, whatever they may be, just because they're also personal, you know, passions of mine as well. But unpacking the business part, because where the business part is combined with the passion asset, that's where the real planning that comes in. And so being the individual to kind of come alongside these families and these entrepreneurs to kind of roll up the sleeves and do the really hard planning, that only comes when you really understand what got them to where they are at that point in time.
When you hit on, you said the preconceived notions of
Sure.
seeing someone driving down the road,
Yeah.
right, in an exotic car, you see somebody wearing a nice watch, you see somebody enjoying a great bottle of wine,
Yeah.
the preconceived notions piece of it. What are some of the descriptors that you would say are of individuals with those preconceived notions?
Like some of the cliches.
Yeah, like what? Yeah. What,
I mean, flaunty, ostentatious. I mean, you know, all of the words that you could, you know, negatively perceive with those types of things. But typically, what I've learned is you walk around a car show. It's actually how we met. Was at a car show, and of course you do have those people, right? And I don't want to be pejorative. Of course you have those people, but that's not really the people that we're interested in hanging out with. It's more so the people who do have those stories, because one of the interesting things is these are intense people, right? If you're making the decision to go buy a ridiculous car like that, you're probably somewhat of a passionate, intense person. And almost every single time we see that same passion and that same intensity with their own entrepreneurial journey, right? These are people who went out and they became an expert in their own field. They became a huge expert in one specific thing. You know, choose your, you know, take your dartboard or whatever that topic was. But these are people with a real passion. And so typically what I've noticed about a lot of these individuals is they're the work hard, play hard people, right? Yeah. They work these insane hours for years and years and years, and most of them still typically do, Samir included. But when that weekend comes around, man, they wanna have that same intensity and that same level of just rawness that went into their building their business when they enjoy themselves, right? So that's when the crazy cars come out and the car shows, and just getting to know all the people who have that same backstory, whatever it might have looked like, but that same intensity and that passion. Yeah. And that's why these Saturday mornings are so fun.
And it's that backstory, that journey, because some people in the preconceived notions would think, all right, here's the trust fund individual, here's a person born with a silver spoon. But if we go back, Samir, in your own story, your
like that.
parents immigrated from India when you were young. You grew up in India, or
I did. I was born there. I lived there for 6 years with my grandparents. Actually, I mean, I came here. I spoke no English. Came here like when I was 6 years old. Essentially, that's when I really met my immediate family, because it was hard for my parents to like raise me here. I mean, it was challenging. They were both working. You know, they're new essentially to the country, and it was just trying to get their own footing, and it's very challenging to all of a sudden you have a new baby into the mix, and you're kind of incorporating and assimilating that. So I mean, it was lovely upbringing. I was nurtured very well with my grandparents. Came here when I was 6 years old. I mean, like I said, little by little, you know, you pick up English very quick. I mean, I like cars so much. I learned Spanish conversational, complete fluency now. Like my first job was when I was in 11th grade. I was a car porter. And
so the car passion started at an early age.
I love being around them.
Yeah.
You know, and it was just fun because it was shiny, and then you get them all cleaned up, and you're a kid, and you're like, oh my God, you know, your eyes like open up, and you're thinking to yourself, like, I mean, I was that kid. You know, I had the Lambo posters. I knew every single car model growing up. And it was just fun to be around it. And then little by little, just kind of like things escalate. In residency, it's crazy because, they're like, you speak Spanish? Like, yeah, next thing you know, they just bomb me with all the Spanish-speaking patients at Cook County Hospital at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm sitting here like, oh my God, please let me make sure I'm saying the right things. But it just things kind of like it's fun, right? I mean, like I said, life's a journey, but it starts off with a lot of hard work and grind.
And when we were speaking before we started recording, one of the things that you really highlighted was just this value of hard work.
Yeah, it is.
You had a few other, failing fast, learning by doing, taking on strategic risks.
Yeah, absolutely.
But hard work to you is a core value that you try to
it is.
to live out.
For me, I think it's almost like pretty much number one, because I feel like if you put your time in, you work hard, the fruits of your labor will show. I mean, and that even goes in medicine as well, because there's always somebody smarter than you. But if you put your time in, one of my mentors actually said, I don't know if he's listening, but Dr. Shannon is a pulmonary critical care attending at Cook County. And I mean, there was just some intensely smart people there. And here you are finishing medical school, competing against some of these people. And I would just say, wow, it's impossible to compete with them. But you're there early, you're doing your rounds, you go in before patients start, you make sure everybody's tucked in, then you go home putting in these, 10, 12, 14-hour days, 80, 100-hour work weeks. And I remember what he said to me at the end of the residency. He says, you know what? I go, I don't know if I had a good rotation, Dr. Shannon. He said, no, you had an excellent rotation. You did well. I go, I feel like these guys are always smarter than me. They always know the answers. He goes, no. You know what? He goes, you're going to catch up to them in knowledge, but hard work always trumps the smart card. And I'll remember that to this day. And I feel like if you put that effort in, eventually it will show. But I mean, as an entrepreneur, you're always taking strategic and calculated risks. I mean, you're always failing as an entrepreneur, but all you need is a couple of really good hits, right? So
you talk about failing fast, right? A few things you started, and then you're like, that's not working. And
everybody, I think everybody that's an entrepreneur, I feel like at some given point in their life, they fail. But you know what though? It's a matter of how much you learn from it and how much you grow from it, and you're always constantly humbled by what you're learning and what you're failing from, right? So
there's and I shared this before, but there's a speaker that I heard that talked about humility, and humility being common sense. And I'm kind of like, okay, what's that mean? And humility being common sense is that anyone that's become an expert in anything knows how hard it is to become an expert in what you do. Even some of these items you've already brought up of going, well, I'm a vein specialist in this, and I've done this. There's aspects of going, I have no idea what you're even talking about, what that means. I know I got veins, but I'll leave it at that. So that expertise that comes into play, how do you balance the expertise and the depth that you're developing with some of these other opportunities that come as an entrepreneur? Well,
I mean, you do what you know. I mean, I know the medicine game because that's who I am. I'm an MD. These expertise that's what I've studied. To going to school as an internist, as a vein specialist. But I mean, from the business aspect of things, I mean, you might even want to call me like a medical entrepreneur, right? Because that's kind of like my focal niche of what I know. Ask me about IT and all that other stuff, and it looks like a puzzle to me. Right? I'm completely clueless. But this is what I know. And I do what I know, so I know from the medical aspect of it. But I kind of like a little bit of not a tangential, but it's a little bit of a slight spin-off. And then you think about the business aspect of things, the common sense, and you try and see if you can make it work. And I enjoy that. I mean, I feel like it's a different aspect of what I do. It's not all just like textbook medicine, but there is this business aspect of it. And for me, it's fun. It's fun. And you want to see if it works, and you try it out, and all of a sudden it's like a baby. You're just like nurturing it, and next thing you know, it grows, and you're like, wow. It's out of diapers, and this thing's got legs, So, it's taken off.
It takes off, and then it becomes, and you think about that legacy, the intentionality that you bring to that to create something that you want to live beyond you.
Absolutely,
right? And that ties into the legacy. So, James, when we're working with individuals in different capacities that all have various expertise in their different businesses, what do you see as that relationship that actually plays itself well between individuals that you're serving, you're working for, you're having fun with the passion assets, the cars as an asset class. And we'll come back to that a little bit later, but just that common denominator that you're seeing across individuals.
Well, you kind of just said it, but I think anybody who's truly become an expert in anything, whether it's medicine or IT or whatever their field is, they truly have become an expert. I think those people, better than anybody else, know just how hard it is to become an expert in that thing.
Yeah.
So I think kind of with that, they take a step back. We take a step back and go, you know what? I recognize how little I know about other things. And then that's when some of the professional relationships start really taking just a really good chapter, is when there's that mutual understanding of how hard everybody's individual fields is. So that's when I'm able to sit down with these individuals and unpack many of the things that they likely have never even thought about because they are just so busy with their own entrepreneurial journeys, because there's that mutual respect of, hey, I did it too. I became an expert in medicine or whatever it may be. I know just how little I know about your field, whether it's financial planning, estate planning, investment management, asset allocation, because they've been so busy building their own thing.
Yeah, I'm speaking at a real estate forum next week, and just thoughts of how real estate's evolving, and actually globally, and what that means as a hard asset. And in the preparation, I shared, it's like just because someone owns a home does not make them an expert as a real estate investor. And how you approach and think through this. That yes, you have a home, yes, you have accounts, but to be an expert in how these items, and we'll come into more detail around what does that mean for passion assets and how you plan around it. But just because you own a car, like I do, I don't understand how it works, right? I don't understand how, and I'd be a little bit intimidated getting into some of the cars that you all drive, but I could admire the beauty of them and the engineering that goes behind them. So it is that expertise and staying humble about what it is that we each know. So Samir, as you look forward with the businesses that you have, being successful, you failed fast, you shut things down, but then areas that are growing, that are nurturing, that are taking on that life, and you're like, wow, this is now growing into from a baby to a young adult to it's going. Where is it all going? How do you think about planning for the future when it comes to this asset that you're creating on your personal balance sheet?
I think from a business standpoint, you're always thinking about end games and like what you're trying to do or what you're trying to accomplish or where you want to be. At some given point, the things that are really sort of growing, I try and grow them, and I try and think about a long-term outlook as far as what I want to do. I think the biggest thing that I'm kind of considering in my life right now at where I am at is consolidation and doing what really, really works and doing them very, very well and trying to take it to the next level. So, for example, whether or not you're trying to go from with one of the businesses, like eventually down the road from a venture capitalist or private equity sort of situation, or, like a strategic partner, something along those lines. But I feel like as these businesses are continuing to grow, it really starts to affect you, because you start thinking about like, okay, what do I do now with this? How does this also affect me personally? And it does to some degree, because all of this sort of kind of creates an identity as far as like who you are. But I think that it's beautiful in some ways, but what happens is you start developing complexities, and that's why you start creating this sort of networking and establishing relationships like James over here, and helping to facilitate and kind of create that legacy and take you on to the next chapter of your life, right? And try and basically take everything that you have, that you've accomplished after all these years, and create that legacy, but at the same time, have some organizational structure for it. And figure out how you're going to essentially pass this down. And a lot of this stuff is very challenging, and you don't realize it, but you start accumulating all these things like over time. And then eventually you're like, oh, wow, you got all this stuff. Like, what do I do with it now? It's a legit problem, right? And you don't think about it, but you're like, wow, this is okay. Now what? And then, me being, say, an MD and, a medical entrepreneur, so to speak, but do I have that knowledge base to say, hey, let's put this in a trust, or let's create this estate, let's figure out how to reduce this estate taxes, or somebody that's going to help me like from a personal standpoint to help categorically organize this wealth. But
you're singing our song right now, Samir, right? Because it's that's.
I hope that was a good plug for you.
Oh my gosh! It was unsolicited, for the record, right? With compliance and whatnot.
I wasn't paid to say that.
But no, you. But that's just it, right? Because there's no way we could do what you do,
right?
And how you approach and how you've created the wealth that you have created. In short order. You think about your life's journey and what that means, and your parents immigrating, they're starting a businesses, you coming as a young child, not speaking the language, and what you've created through a lot of hard work and taking strategic risks and building that. And as you've done that well, it's created what a lot of people consider a high-class problem, right?
Yeah.
The burden of wealth that a lot of people would want, but it's a challenge nonetheless of how you do that well. And that is the aspect of how you think about these things for future family generations.
Yeah.
How do you create? Because we haven't met anybody yet that just says, I just want to pay more in taxes.
Yeah. Oh.
Right? I mean, I say that almost every episode of this podcast is that it's either going to your family, it's going to charities important to you, or it's going to taxes. You get to choose. But those are the three buckets.
Yep.
There hasn't been another bucket created, and you get to choose.
Sure.
So the question is, are you proactively choosing in that?
Got it, yeah.
And that's the totality of the portfolio. That's the totality of the assets that come into play.
Sure.
And that includes these passion assets. So how do you define a passion asset for yourself?
Well, I think a passion asset, I mean, it's relative to everybody, but it's something that you really enjoy. I mean, it has to come from a sense of enjoyment, a sense of fulfillment. I feel like it's also a sense of accomplishment. You know, I remember when I got my first watch, it was like, oh, wow, I couldn't believe it. Because when I was a kid, or, when I lived in New York City with one of my best friends on the Upper East Side, and he was an investment banker and private equity and hedge fund guy now, and I was hanging out with all of them, and I would just see these guys, and that's another thing that sparked this whole entrepreneurial and business bug, because I was surrounded by these sort of wealth atmosphere, so to speak. But I'll just kind of small shift, and we would go down and shop by Greenwich Village and hang out, and we go to Canal Street, and I was like, oh my God, man, they got all this like knockoff stuff over here, and he's like, knock yourself out, man, and then
knock yourself out with a knockoff.
Yeah. So he's like, so I got like a fake Cartier, a fake Tag Heuer, I got like a fake Rolex, and I'm like, this shit's amazing, So, I'm sorry about that little S-bomb there, right? And I mean, granted, these watches would work for like 3 to 6 months, and then the hands would fall off. And then I remember saying that, man, someday I'm gonna get like, the real thing, Yeah. And then little by little, you start just sort of collecting, and just kind of you got to create a relationship also with the jeweler. I have a great jeweler. His name is Matt. He's over at Rasney. But in any case, I've been working with him for the past 4 to 5 years. Guy's awesome. And essentially, I just built a little collection, little by little. I mean, granted, there's other things that I enjoy. I mean, I really like Rolex has always been one of my top marquees. I told myself I had a fake Cartier, so I got actually the real Cartier. And that was cool, just because for me, it was more of a, how would you say it? It was more like had sentimental value.
Yeah. Coming full circle.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I remember that watch breaking, and I was like, oh, wow, this is cool. And I looked at it, and I don't wear it that much anymore, but it's just kind of like, it just gives you things that I've enjoyed, right? I've enjoyed cars.
To enjoy it.
Yeah, I've always been a car guy. I worked as a car porter. I washed cars as a kid, and I always thought they were really, really cool. And eventually, and I started generating some revenue, and had my first car, first sports car was a Corvette C5. I've always been a vet guy. I mean, granted, I'm like 5'6", 150 pounds,
Classic Corvette guy.
Yeah, I mean, I still love them. But little by little, it kind of like just evolved, It went into Beamers and Benzes, and I had my first exotic was a 2013 Gallardo. It was
before we go there. So you met at a car show. You met at a car show.
Oh yeah, that's a good story.
And so we have done our James, you describe what we have coming up here very soon.
Yeah. So June 8th, the Clearwater Capital Foundation Supercar Show is our fourth one. It's really become quite a Chicagoland tradition in the automobile space. The idea first was kind of hatched by our foundation team. This was back actually before I took on executive director, and it was right during COVID. And same as you, I grew up going to car shows before I could even drive. I remember I'd make my dad drive me to these car shows in our Saturn at the time. And just being around all the supercars and driving them on, back when I played video games and knew every single car.
Yeah,
could identify any single car by how it sounded
thing.
from 3 blocks away. That's why we've always gotten along. Just a classic, car guy as a teenager. But I'd grown up in that space, and it was right during COVID. We were sitting in our boardroom as a foundation team, going, all the events are shut down, all the galas are shut down, all the black tie, even the golf outings, all the things that we had supported as a foundation had just ceased to occur. So, we're kind of sitting there in silence, trying to scratch our heads about, what can we do as a foundation, because we have this, monies coming in that need to be going to good causes. And so I look out of our window at our parking lot, and I thought, kind of said as a joke, heck, we could do a car show. And I think it was even you. You're like, wait a minute, go with that. And somehow, we just started as a team, just started talking. And I'm like, well, I've never hosted a car show, but I think we could do a pretty good job. I've been going to them for, it was 12 years at that point in time. So then thus the Clearwater Capital Supercar Show was born. So we, partnered with 3 local charities that fit the giving values of our foundation that we had identified. We've used those 3 charities every single year, and the show has just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. We've officially surpassed $100,000 in aggregate raised in all the different shows. Our goals get bigger each year. And so, June 8th, we're going to have our 4th one. We're expecting over 300 cars. Some of the neatest cars that you will see in Chicago. It's branded as a supercar show, right? Because selfishly, that's what I'm into. That's what he's into. He's got some crazy cars that come, and he's always been a sponsor as well, which we appreciate.
Of course.
But, you see a little bit of everything. And, we have a lot of variety of cars. And at the end of the day, it's all to be raising money for our 3 groups that we have there on site. So
And who are the 3 charities?
Yeah, so we have Fellowship Housing, we have a Giving Heart Foundation, and then we have Bridge Youth and Family Services. So there are 3 local organizations that we all have ties to in one way or another that fit the giving values of the Clearwater Capital Foundation.
And as a firm, we've got a lot of just generous philanthropic families that we serve, that we get inspired by and what they've done. And with that wealth comes this responsibility.
Sure.
And I go back to my 3 buckets. You could do it in tax, you could use it for charity, or you can turn around in terms of the benefits for your family. And to be able to link those up and say, well, we can have fun with it. We can have, our clients and friends bring in their cars. How many cars did we have last year?
So we had just under 300 cars last year, and at the pace at which we've been getting registrations, we're rearranging the parking lot a little bit
It's
too.
huge.
It's gotten very, very big,
It's
and so we're
huge,
expecting over 300 cars this year.
Oh, it's got to be.
Yeah.
It's going to be. Every year, I feel like it just multiplies. I mean, it's wild just how big the parking lot gets filled up.
Yeah.
And the quality of the cars, too, is it's amazing.
We've got
amazing.
we got a couple big surprises planned this year.
Hypercars and
some crazy
exotics.
things. We have helicopters landing.
Yeah.
We have boats coming out. Motorcycles
crazy.
come. It ends up being kind of just like an assault on the senses in the best way.
And we underwrite all the expense, so we take care of all the expense. So any dollar that's donated, any dollar that's sponsored, Samir, thank you so much for continuing to be a sponsor.
Yeah, merchandise sold.
And merchandise sold. It all goes to the end charities to support
It's a great
what
cause.
it is that they're doing.
Yeah.
It's a great cause.
And to help them in the causes that are out there. So thank you again for engaging in that way.
My pleasure.
Saturday, June 8th. If people want to find out more information, where would they go find it?
Yeah, so it's right on our website, cspwealth.com/2024 car show, or probably even easier is on our Instagram. Instagram is our main platform for all things car show, just because that's where most of us live in car world.
Okay.
CCP Wealth is just our Instagram. It's on all of our websites, and all the announcements are there and on our website as well.
CCP Wealth
Yep.
through Instagram.
Correct.
And people can find information there, see the videos and all the past pictures, and hopefully
to get pumped
come
up
out
for this year.
Yeah, just to continue to support great causes and have a lot of fun. Have a lot of fun doing it. So when we think about this concept of passion assets, because there's certain things that are people's passion, right? Individuals that have passions. I think about planting, annual flowers. Some people are passionate about, flowers, but an annual dies at the end of the year, and then you've got to regrow, right? In terms of how you approach that. And there's a passion that's there, but that gardening, which I actually enjoy, doesn't show up on anybody's balance sheet, right?
Correct.
So we're talking about passion assets that are part of your assets that you actually have to plan for, because if unlike the car maybe that I drive that depreciates over time, collectibles are appreciating. And I was reading this, and I'm just going to read it right out of Family Office Magazine, because that's what I read on the weekend. The spring edition came out. According to Classic.com, and this was in Family Office Magazine, according to Classic.com, since 2020, the market for classic and exotic cars has experienced tremendous growth, and records were being set across almost every make and model, right? And when they're talking about records, they're talking about valuation. They're talking about the assets. So it does go beyond the passion itself for individuals to enjoy it, but they enjoy it, and it's also an asset in terms of has to be properly planned for as anyone moves forward.
Sure.
Insurance, special considerations. So how do you think about the asset side of the passion, right? How do you choose the right vehicle? How do you make sure that it's the right quality, the style, the enjoyment? How do those things come together?
God, it's like, it's such a focal question, but I mean, it comes down to, well, I mean, if you're looking at it like from a collectible standpoint, it filters down into that sort of, is it unique? Is it special? What's so special about it? For example, is it like an old school V8? Is it a V12? Is it a V10? Is it naturally aspirated? Now you're heading into like hybrid technology. And then the EVs, and essentially like what happens is the V12 naturally aspirated cars are going to be, we're essentially going to see a significant spike or rise, because that's going to be the next collectible as like the muscle cars from, the 1950s and 60s go, right? So I think as technology changes, you're also going to still have that person that wants to hear that rev, that noise, that engine. So I think there's different aspects of it, but I think every brand has their own sort of collectible or desired vehicle, and I'm not just talking about like, Lamborghini and Ferrari, or even, you got Porsche in there with some of the, the 911s, the GT2 RSs, and, the 918 Weissachs and stuff that you understand, right? And then you're going into like the Scions and Centenarios and, right, the Lamborghini V12 Aventadors, and, right? So, and then you got the Ferraris coming in with the Enzos and the 250 GTs from back in the day.
So now we're back to a level of expertise that's needed, right?
I think it depends like on what you're really trying to get, or what you like as an asset, and how you look at that car. I mean, most cars are depreciating assets, right? But I think there comes a point when you've worked so hard to achieve something, you kind of also want to get what you want and enjoy it, but you also don't want to look at it as like, nobody wants a horrifically bad investment.
Right.
You know, I mean, you don't want a horrifically depreciating cars, but we also look at these cars that we enjoy, and you're like thinking to yourself, hey, you enjoy it for 2-3 years, you don't lose your shirt, and you had fun with it, right? I mean, that's a lot of these exotic cars. That's where they fall in.
Yeah.
So how do you limited supply, right? Which always makes price
supply and demand, right?
Yeah, it makes price discovery hard, right? It's like private transactions, when you talk about private equity events, right? Price discovery when you go through a private transaction isn't like going to the public markets where you have price being set, every moment the markets are open. So how do you guard yourself regarding the passion, being excited about going, hey, I would pay up for this more than maybe other people? And also, where does it get to a point where it would just be foolish as an acquisition because the valuation of the asset is out of line? How do you go about your due diligence?
I mean, to some degree with this, there's also, it's kind of like the real estate market, right? I mean, it's comparables and comps. So if you're looking at, I'll give an example of maybe like an Aventador, one of my favorite cars, right? So, right. So then although the market is not huge in it because there's not so many of them out there, but you're looking at for the ones that are out there, so to speak, right? I mean, like, where does it fare up against some of these other ones? And that's how you gauge it as well, because it is a passion asset, but it's not going to depreciate as much as, say, like a Honda or a Toyota, but it goes down to like a certain level. But at the same time, you're also dealing with market fluctuations with interest rates and with supply and demand and things costing more than than MSRP and then when they first came out, right?
Right.
So, but I think in this field, it's comparables, and you have to kind of essentially do like a national or even a global market analysis and see where these vehicles fall into place.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
And it's finding those comparables, and it's also trying to find the right comparable and the right part of the country and how it's been treated, and then the parts or what got replaced on it versus what's authentic on the
models, the year.
Right.
There's a lot of different moving parts, and that's it's to some degree when you're a car guy, it's kind of what makes it fun because you start kind of understanding. Oh, that's an S, or that's an SVJ, or that's an SV, or that's you know what I mean?
Yeah.
These are like different models of these cars, but you get a general idea. Oh, that was a single clutch transmission. I mean, that car is still, but now they're coming out with like double clutch, and you start getting excited over this stuff because there's no lag. But there's weird stuff that we all kind of have this commonality that we'll discuss and have fun with, and when other people get it, all of a sudden you just gel.
Yeah.
You know?
So, there's you talk about the volatility, and this is another item.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people look at the stock markets and they're volatile, right? I wish every individual within their personally owned direct invested business had a ticker symbol for their own business that was volatile. It's a bad day and the price of their company is fluctuating. No one thinks about that in the private markets, right? But in the public markets, on a day-to-day basis, people get excited or they get depressed based on what happened that day, and yet they don't do it in their own business. So I wish we'd do away with that, ticker symbols and volatility. Is it a good investment or not? Because it does play out in passion assets.
It does.
LiveX, which is wine, so I enjoy a nice glass of wine, nice bottle of wine. What's Bordeaux doing? What vintage? Where's it at? And you actually have the market for it taking place in LiveX over in the UK. To be monitoring that and figuring out. And there is volatility even when it comes to your bottle of wine or your case of wine on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis. You have to pay attention to in passion assets.
Sure.
Beyond price discovery, James, what are other elements that come into play when it comes to due diligence and almost underwriting the acquisition of this asset? Because that's what it is. Even though it's a passion, it's an asset.
I think that's something that I try so frequently with clients who dabble in the passion asset space, and it's at varying levels. We can look at the UBS Family Office report and kind of get a general idea of where passion assets fit on the average family office client. So call it pick your definition, $35, $40, $50 million balance sheet. In the U.S., we know on average it's about 1% of their wealth. So on a $30 million balance sheet, that might look like $300,000. Whether that's art, whiskey, watches, cars, that's kind of the average. And then there's even like neat nuances where you can go overseas and look at that same report for Sweden. Sweden, the average family office clientele, they have more like 4% of their wealth tied up in passion assets. So it is interesting. There's trends that we can do. But what I always am encouraging clients to do with the help of us is really treat it as a true asset. Because usually when people started getting into the space, and let's just use cars because that's what I like, right? There probably was a depreciating asset. It probably was truly just an expense that, was something that they enjoyed doing. But as they achieved more and more success and the car collection really started forming, they might not have had that shift in mindset to where this really needs to be treated like, in a true wealth management space. So I always look to the multifamily office service standards, right? We know there's 10 of them, but you think about the lifestyle management side of things. I mean, has your collection gotten so big of cars that you now need to bring in a actual collection manager? Family governance, that'd be another service standard. Does your family know what you want to happen with your 10, 15, 20 cars? If something were to happen, have you had those conversations? Because without that intentionality, without really managing it as a true asset, it's just completely not giving it credit for what it's become on the balance sheet. Risk management, that's a huge one that we spend time working with clients on, specifically on passion assets. I had an incident a few weeks ago in New York City where let's just say I was very thankful that I had my watch correctly insured to where the incident was an inconvenience and not a financial loss. But even within that, there's nuances between how you're having certain assets insured, right? Is it at the appraised value or is it for the MSRP? On a lot of these pieces, that's a huge discrepancy. And so you just having that serious wealth management, investment management lens at which you're looking into these assets is huge, because it's typically not something that people employ when they're thinking of their Lambo or their McLaren or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and you have to approach it differently.
Completely.
Than you would. You still need your car insurance and your title correctly, and everyone thinks that way when they're buying a regular car.
Sure.
But when you tie this in and going, well, it's not just a car, it is an asset, and you're thinking about the potential for the appreciating component of that, you have to be thinking about it differently. And so, Samir, as you've been thinking about the kind of the evolution, right, and you tie this legacy piece in and what you're doing in the businesses and the enjoyment that's there.
Sure.
What are other passion areas, right? You've talked a little bit about cars with the car show coming up. You've mentioned watches, and shout out to Matt out there, right? That you've been working with,
Matt. Yeah, there you
go. And going through things. What other areas come into play? And then how do you look at maybe other passion areas? I bring up wine as one. As you look at other passion areas that might not be of interest, how do you view those individuals given the way you perceive the passion around your own assets?
Well, I mean, I think passion is also relative. I mean, it's got to be. It's not just how I perceive things too. Everybody has their individual sort of tastes. I mean, like for example, for you, for wine, right? So I mean, I perceive it as like it depends how well and it gets incorporated into their life. As far as their enjoyment, their fulfillment. I mean, it may not be cars, it may not be watches, but why can't it be wine? But ultimately, it might be something else. I mean, for me, it just doesn't stop at like cars or watches or something else, but there might be something else that I like that I wind up like enjoying, and I don't, and eventually just kind of like learning and meeting the right people, and ultimately maybe seeing if there's something else that winds up becoming a passion asset.
Yeah.
But I think, these could be like relative to you, to your lifestyle, and things that you've enjoyed. It just happened to be part of my journey growing up.
Yeah.
But it's cool. It's neat, right? And that's why it's very passion driven.
Yeah.
So
The one that really struck me that I really appreciated from each of you was talking about this passion. It's the enjoyment, right? It's living life, living it. Because I would imagine some individuals would buy the same vehicles, right, that are coming to our car, and they put them away to be locked away and pristine, and don't let them be touched. Don't get dirt on them, anything like that. Mm-hmm. But you both shared stories of like how you opened the doors because you were once those kids.
Oh yeah.
Right. So James, you just responded. So why don't you start, and then Samir, you share a similar story.
Well, I think we
have a similar
realized
story.
that we had almost the exact same story. So this I will never forget this day, and we've almost realized that it might have even been you, but we realized that it wasn't you.
But it was
I think I was 16, and I was rolling into a supercar Saturday, which at that time was kind of the premier supercar show. And I, like I said, I rolled it in my black Saturn, and to their credit, they let me park right next to the big boy cars, and I never knew the difference. But I was walking around just drooling over these cars. I mean, the supercar Saturday was the only time I could even be within 10 feet of these cars, other than seeing them.
Fun.
Other than seeing them on the road. I had the camera. I mean, I'm drooling over these cars. I remember there was this baby blue Lamborghini Gallardo, which was actually the first Lambo he had. And I'm in awe. I think I'm just like starstruck looking at this car. And I hear this guy go, "Hey, kid, it's open." I'm like, "What?
Who me?
He's talking to me?" Like, it's like the God speaking. And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "It's open." He goes, "Jump in." So I'm like a kid in a china shop. I'm like, very carefully opening this car. And when I got in, I grabbed the steering wheel. I'm just like, it was this life-changing moment where I'm like, I will do everything in my power to one day have this car. No, I don't know what it's going to look like, but one day I will have this car. And that guy probably doesn't even realize how much that little moment completely changed my life. And so now what's really kind of come full circle is now having a car like that, with that same raging bull on the steering wheel. Every single time I see a kid who, gets wide-eyed as he's walking up, I'm like, "Hey, car's open, jump in," just to try to recreate that same moment that little does this guy know completely changed the motivation of my life to be able to try to do what he had done. Man, if I can recreate that for even one other kid, I just think that's the coolest full circle. And really, that is what it means to be a real car guy, is to share that interest with other people, because it is such a unique opportunity to get to pilot these beasts every single day. It's such a fortunate position. It's the end result, right, that we've talked about, not maybe seeing all the things that went on behind the scenes, but to recreate that moment is one of the most special things, and it puts a smile on my face every single time.
Yeah, when I come back to car rallies you've done too, but Samir, you've got a similar story.
Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, right, it's very similar too, because I was always surrounded by these nice cars, and I would always get like wide-eyed. And most of the guys, that have had these really nice cars, they've always been kind of open-armed, and you get googly-eyed as a kid, and it's kind of a very similar story, right? The first time I think it was somebody that had it was a Lamborghini, it was a Murcielago, and first time I saw it in real life, I was like, this thing is just crazy, I was just so dumbstruck and dumbfounded, and he's like, put the doors up, and he's like, "Check it out, man,"
Get in.
And I was like, this guy talking to me, I'm like, it was just so wild, but I feel like now it's like the tables turned. So when I see, somebody coming up with their kid, and they're like, "Oh, is that a Lamborghini, or is this and that? And can I take a picture of it?" And I'll put the doors
Jump
up,
in,
and I'll
yeah.
say, because you start thinking to yourself like, hey, this could be like the time when you create positive ambition and a spark for this kid, for him to someday actually have his own.
Yeah.
Because
Exactly.
I would say, like, for me, that was something to work to, right? Having a fake watch and like working towards having a nice watch,
real one.
right?
Yeah.
So, but it starts off as like something like kind of like that little spark, and you don't realize it. But now you kind of, you put this kid in the right direction. You realize that it could be ambition based on goals and achievement. His family upbringing as far as keeping him engaged and doing all the right things in sports. But there's personalities. But I feel like this is a component that may help to drive his ambition, because it drove me.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just now I just feel like you're a little. I feel good about it.
Yeah.
It's not even like you don't like obligated or anything else. Like the smile for me comes when I see the smile on the kid's face.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like I see the car every day.
Right.
It's great. Don't get me wrong. I enjoy it. But then when the kids come up and then they start just getting so like, it's like a new toy for them that they've never seen.
And then
you
you
know
experience
what I mean?
it through
Yeah.
their
Yeah,
their
so
eyes.
it's like through their lens, right?
Yeah.
It's a vicarious enjoyment. Like I'm seeing myself as a kid looking at it through their lens, and you're just like, it puts a smile on your face every time, you know?
Well, and that's
So,
the fascinating thing. That the car is a motivator.
sure.
But it's also it's not the be all end all.
No,
right?
absolutely
it's not.
not.
The
No.
because it's the you enjoy it.
Yeah.
But you're sharing the enjoyment.
It's
right?
all it's-
and you're
that's what it's
helping
about.
and so that gets back to this you mentioned earlier, this preconceived notions piece, because I think there is a lot of people out there with preconceived notions about everything, right? Everybody's a judge on everything. Everybody's got an opinion on everything. And these preconceived notions that come into play that don't see the hard work, don't see the journey, don't see the story, and they've got, okay, this person's all caught up into themselves in terms of what they're doing, and yet to you, it's not about the car. It's actually about the young person's face of getting the opportunity to see this. And then using the car, I want to come back to this car rally thing, because you've gone down, you've pulled individuals together, and you've done some events with driving kids down from a pediatric cancer ward.
Yeah,
I'm sure I mess up the story here, but share a little bit more about
so
that.
that's the I think you're referencing the Angel Rides event for Cal's Angels, organized through Ultimate Road Rally, who we have some affiliations with. That's probably one of the coolest events I've ever done, almost because it replicates this exact moment Samir just described, like times 5, because what you're doing is you're essentially taking kids from the Cal's Angels organization and you're taking them on Angel Rides. So they get to come out. These are kids battling, tribulations that we would, could never,
All kinds
never
of
relate
pediatric
to.
cancers.
Yes. And they line up and they get to take their pick. Do they want the orange McLaren? Do they want the white Ferrari? Or maybe they want the blue Rolls Royce, right? And they get to come out, and we actually have a police escort. And they take us around Naperville. Sometimes it's down at the Audubon Country Club. But it is just one of the most special events because you're taking them out of the hospital or whatever care situation they're in and just giving them a moment of distraction, right? Giving their siblings a moment of distraction. And it's really intense, but it's intensely cool.
And one of the things about our own car show, again, out of my own ignorance, is walking around. The first day, I'm like, okay, well, a lot of the cars here are nicer than going down to First Look for Charity at the Chicago Auto Show, right? And then they put up the velvet ropes. I'm like, of course we're going to have velvet ropes. No one should be getting close to these vehicles. And yet everyone that's there is opening their doors up showing and inviting the kids in and talking about them and interacting. It really is a community event with individuals coming together to share in that enjoyment. Yeah. And again, I think for anybody that's out there that has this preconceived notion, maybe they're just hanging out with the wrong individuals and they need to come over and
come to the
meet
show.
You all,
come see it,
and engage in that way.
Yeah, it's a very philanthropic group. 99% of these exotic car guys you talk to, there's almost always that component of them, and I think people probably wouldn't guess that by seeing the car going down the road.
Right. And as you think about physical security, as you think about some of those other areas that are specific that come into consideration, any others that listeners should be thinking about and how they approach the subject of saying, I'm getting into this space of passion assets, whatever it might be, the watches, the whiskeys, the wine, go down the list, artwork. As they're getting into that space, James, you spend a lot of time on this with individuals and thinking about passion assets. What should be some of those other items that individuals are contemplating if they're entering into this space?
Yeah, I think you can't. It's so cliche, but you can't talk about passion assets without saying the provenance word, right? That's everyone's favorite word when it comes to this, whether it's art, whiskey, wine, and basically what that is, as you're obviously aware, is the story and the lineage and the history behind whatever asset, right? Was this watch worn by Churchill? Was this car owned by this person? Because that, when you're looking at it as an asset, as an investment, that provenance has such an important role in what the value of it. One of my favorite examples is probably the Ferrari Enzo. We all know Ferrari Enzo. One of the first modern day supercars from Ferrari. Thing looks like an absolute spaceship, even by today's standards. And so They made 399 Ferrari Enzos. The 400th Ferrari Enzo that they made for the Pope. Okay? Trust me when I realize this too. So a few years ago, famously, the 400th Ferrari Enzo was auctioned off for the benefit of the Catholic Church, and it went for like over $6 million, right? And that was 2 or 3 times more than the last Enzo had gone for. So the story and the lineage behind that asset, when it comes to these passion assets, you have to really just dive even deeper, especially when you are looking at it through that investment lens. Yeah. There's so many other considerations, whether you're overseas and you purchase an art piece, right? Maybe you've had a few glasses of wine beforehand and you got excited with the paddle and you end up with this crazy piece. What now? How are you safely getting this back to the States? How are you getting this mounted? How are you getting this transported? There's so many different nuances. Specifically, Clearwater Capital, we like to leverage the Family Wealth Alliance for all these types of nuances that come into handling passion assets, because while we might know cars and how to transport a car from LA, right? That's easy for us. Yeah. But some people might not know, right? Yeah. What are the different valuation things that would happen to a case of wine by shipping across the ocean? These are things that people might not be aware of. We leverage the Family Wealth Alliance because their network, their Forte network, are all different organizations that we can tap into when that isn't that knowledge that we might have off the bat as professionals.
That's a great point, because no one can have all the answers. Back to being an expert in anything, right? Yeah. We can't be an expert in everything as we work with people on their estate structure, asset placement, where do you place certain assets inside, outside your taxable estate. But then leveraging, Family Wealth Alliance and saying we may not know the answer, but we know who knows the answer. We go back to that network and tap into. I bought art when I was over in Rome, using over by the Vatican, and need to ship it back. How do I do that? And it's like, well, we can solve that, even though we don't have the that direct answer individual. We know the person that does.
And then let's back up. Let's take a look at your asset allocation on the balance sheet and say, hey, is this still in line? Do we want to be increasing this allocation to your art, or did we maybe go overboard? Let's rebalance here, because all of that comes back into the wealth management lens that these passion assets really should be being looked at through, and not just as something that you spent money on.
Yeah, investment pieces.
Speak, right. Yeah, absolutely. And so Samir, earlier you mentioned, you've built these businesses, creating these businesses. It's creating the wealth. You still enjoy practicing on a day-to-day basis, but also wanting to simplify, consolidate, and how you're evolving. So on the journey, and hopefully there's decades still in front of you in terms of what this journey is. So. If you could write that script today of, what does the journey look like for the next several decades for you? How would you envision that playing itself out?
I think the next several decades is more about enjoying, I mean, living a life well lived, living my best life, trying to do as much as possible from a philanthropy perspective. I feel like, you work hard, you play hard, but it's also, I'm at this point in my life where also I feel like I need to give back and create, a name and legacy for myself, not just like my businesses, but from a personal standpoint, from a family standpoint. But I think this is going to be a lot more traveling, and it's going to be a little bit more of a decompression, a little bit, now from a business standpoint, more consolidation, and just doing the few things that really, really work and doing them very, very well and creating that legacy. But I think there's still a lot of great years ahead. As an entrepreneur, I'm always ambitious. Sometimes my wife has to stop me because I'm always looking for the next hustle. And she's like, chill out a little bit. You're getting ahead of yourself. So let's.
I mean, Sadia is your wife.
Sure.
You work together too in business. Yeah. And so if she was sitting here right now, what would she be saying about the entirety of this conversation?
I think she would really be happy with it, right? I mean, I think that she would really get an understanding of how this hard work also manifests into doing what you like, which is kind of passion assets. But at the same time, it's kind of understanding and realizing that there was a journey, especially for me, starting off at where I was as a little kid to who I am now, and it's the story that's come together. But she's definitely a huge piece of the puzzle for me, because I feel like she had started her own pharmacy. She put herself through school. I get a significant, probably all my, I probably she should charge me for all the advice she gives me. She'd be a multimillionaire probably, even well beyond anything that we have. So, I mean, I get a lot of like great financial advice and guidance from her. Very level-headed. I think behind every good man, there's a good woman, you know, and regardless, there's always somebody it's a team effort, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I feel like this next years ahead, we want to do a lot of traveling, family, philanthropy, and kind of like organize our lives a little bit more, because there's still all that estate planning, and we don't want everything to go towards taxes, right? I'd rather have it to go towards like family. I'd rather have it go towards charity.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, because those are all great causes. Don't get me wrong, I pay my fair share of taxes, but hey, right? I mean, right, so
you don't need to add more than you have to already, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we do. We pay enough, and I think that, like you said, it's about kind of like carrying on the legacy and the generation into charity and into family.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and it is great to be able to enjoy it. Talk about community, but even with your own family. I mean, for you to be looking at that, going, no, we want to enjoy. We work really hard. We want to enjoy the fruit of that, and be able to give back, and how you approach it too. So James, as we start thinking, I want to give Samir the last word of advice, right, to all the listeners that are out there. If you think about this subject matter, and there's a lot of different paths we could go down, we spent a lot of time talking as of late regarding this sunsetting of estate taxes. So I don't want to get too technical and boring versus the fun stuff of the car show, but it's a really important time for individuals to think about these assets as assets, their balance sheet, what's going on. Can you bring up to speed listeners of what's going on with estate taxes and what the levels are? And
well, it is something that we talk about so often, and more recently there is quite a sense of urgency to be putting some things in place now. A lot of these entrepreneurs, the business owners, the business founders, I'm not picking on Samir, I'm just talking about in general, they are so focused on getting to that next level, hitting that next quota, at least the next project, that they're not always taking that pause point to say, wait a minute, am I putting things in place I need to be putting in now? So I think about like a hypothetical family with a $100 million balance sheet. Right now, the exclusion is $13.6 million per individual for 2024. If you're a married couple, keep the math simple. It's 13.5. That's $27 million you have exempt from federal estate tax. That means that if you have 27 that's exempt, that means you have another $73 million that is subject to federal estate tax. And that's on a graduated scale, but you pretty quickly get to a 40% tax rate on that. So if you're doing the math back of the envelope, 40% on that amount of the $73 million is an estate tax bill of $29 million. Now, even as a $100 million family, you probably don't have $29 million of cash. So then now you're scrambling. Are we selling down a business? Are we selling a beach house in Naples? Are we selling off a car collection? There's this scramble. And then to make it even more complicated, the sunset that you just mentioned, that 13.61 amount is scheduled to sunset back to $7 million in 2026. Do the mental math of where that $29 million tax bill goes with that exclusion cut in half. So there is a bit of sense of urgency now. There are planning items that need to be taken care of now. I know we are staying busy for sure with those families that fit that criteria. Yeah. But that's where the intersection of planning and passion assets come together. Yeah. Because as these assets that you've accumulated for fun, because you love them, because they're cool, because they sound crazy, like the V12 Lambo, there are planning considerations that need to come into them, getting them out of the estate. Even more specific considerations of valuations, right? Is it an appreciating asset? How do we value it? How do we get out of the estate? Right? Because there's different nuances for all of them. So that's what we are staying most busy doing right now with those families, because all of it comes together, right? While it's fun to talk the cars and the watches, and it puts a smile on all of our faces, there are serious planning considerations that need to come into play right now. To use another car analogy, the vehicles that we're fortunate enough to get to pilot, they're extremely complex, right? I know the last thing I need to be doing is tinkering around with it in my garage, right? I go to a professional whose expertise is working on that car. We're serving as the expert for the families in terms of the planning items that come along with it. Yeah, and individuals that, I'm working with, we're working with together and as a team, I keep reminding them that the sunset is the current law of the land. That's what's not attorneys, we're not accountants, right? But dealing with these things all the time.
It happens the end of 2025. And people are like, well, then I got time. I've got, the next whatever, 18, 20 months to be working through this. It's like, yeah, but the attorneys that are really good at what they're doing and our time working with individuals, that's not everybody raising their hand. That queue is getting filled up pretty quickly. And if you do all this planning and that sunset happens, you're going to be really glad you did. And if it doesn't happen, it gets extended, keeping in mind it has to be extended by an act of Congress and the administration in order to continue it. Otherwise, it does drop back down automatically without a politician raising their hand to vote. If it gets continued, then you're no worse off. If you do the planning well, you're no worse off. You're actually going to create additional opportunity for good planning beyond that. If it's not, we just don't want anyone waking up in the beginning of 2026 going, I wish I could have done something differently.
And realizing that their estate tax liability is quite literally $5, $10, $15 million more, potentially, given the circumstance, than it could have been with a few trusts created and some gifting strategies.
When you're talking about the graduated piece, it's 40% at the federal level, but depending on the state
Not
you're
even
in,
talking state level.
Yeah, that adds to it as well. So there is a sense of urgency when it comes to it. There's a lot of fun and enjoyment that comes out of passion assets. Enjoying that glass of wine, the really good whiskey. I could go on in different directions. Enjoying the car, looking forward to the car show. And that all is the outcome of the really hard work, the strategic risks, the failing quickly. So when you come back to advice, Samir, of individuals that were, you as a young boy, you as a teenager, you in your 20s and coming out of med school, what advice would you be sharing from a mental state? Because this is the other part, and I'm getting on a little bit of this. The other part that people look at is the financial capital. They miss the human capital and the intellectual capital. Because we talk a lot about tangible assets, right? Cars are tangible assets. But they miss the intangible asset, which is the intellectual capital that you go and hone your skills through medical school. You do the residency that you do. You trade your time and your human capital in order to have learning and experiences that come into play. People have to invest first in their human intellectual capital to realize the financial capital, to figure out how to go invest and enjoy for the future as well. And that's the part, and that's why I love when you come back and it's like, it's a hard work. It's hard work that has to come in. But beyond that, what other advice would you share with listeners?
I'm a huge Warren Buffett fan. He's got a million quotes out there. Everybody loves Warren Buffett, right? So I think, one of the biggest ones is always invest in yourself, right? You are your best investment. And he says that over and over again, especially when times are tough. For example, I'll give a hypothetical example. Like during COVID, someone may want to go back to school and get their education and further enhanced, maybe an MBA or something else during that time. That's your time and that's your investment to go ahead and better yourself. That's an investment that you're putting into yourself that's going to eventually manifest into something else, financial gain down the road, right? So I think, also other things for, young entrepreneurs, it's learn by doing as well. In residency, we have a certain saying, it's called watch one, do one, teach one. So if your senior resident came up and said, hey, I'm going to do a lumbar puncture on this patient, just go ahead and watch this. Well, guess what? Next one, you're up. It's pretty intimidating. But us doctors, we hold each other to higher standards. But eventually, if you don't take that risk and you don't try, you will never have ever gotten proficient at that procedure, right? But taking strategic, calculated risks that you think are going to work out well for you. Granted, you have to do your due diligence, your homework, to see if this business or what you're planning on doing is going to be successful. But as well as investing your time, your energy, your hard work, your persistence, and then you're going to see the fruits of those labor essentially, cultivate and grow and just blossom into something nice. And then eventually you'll wind up building your legacy. But it starts off with hard work and the grind and the persistence and investing in yourself and your commitment and dedication to really grow and better yourself. So,
because when you shared that when we were speaking a couple weeks ago, watch one, do one, teach one. Right? And that's the application of that. Absolutely in medicine, I think that that resonates. But I think there's an aspect in all lines of business. Right? What are we watching? What are we taking in? What are we learning about the world around us? Where are we doing and taking those strategic risks, as you highlighted? And then where are we teaching? Where are we mentoring? Who's the next individual that we're bringing along? And that could be children. It could be grandchildren. It could be individuals on the team. It could be people in the community. whatever it is. And so I love that cycle, and that's probably a great way to leave our listeners today.
Yeah.
Right? Is to be out there, watch one, do one, teach one, and work hard at it. And life's a journey, and you've been a great example of that in your own life's journey. The inspiration that's there, the opportunities that are in front of individuals, no matter how they got to where they're at, right? There's opportunities in front of them to take advantage of that. And I am so grateful for you participating, giving of your time and being here. Looking forward to thank you again for your sponsorship of the car show.
Appreciate it.
Your car being there. I'm going to keep an eye on the kids' faces walking around now.
I mean, you'll
that
love
one
it.
more intently.
Yeah.
If other people, listeners, want to again join us, it's Saturday, June 8th. It's in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. You can go to the website or find us on Instagram at
CCP Wealth.
So thank you again, listeners. And if you want to continue the conversation, send us an email at clearconversations@ccpwealth.com. Have a blessed day.